Salvete everyone. In this video I'm going to go over relative clauses, which are an important grammatical construction introduced in stage 15. A bit of background to get us underway. A clause is the grammatical term for a part of a sentence containing a verb. And we should already know that every single sentence has to have a main clause which contains the main verb. And this is the bit of the sentence that makes sense on its own. Any additional bits you can add in are known as subordinate clauses. They depend on the main clause and don't make sense of their own. In stage 15 we meet a special type of subordinate clause known as a relative clause, and they get their name because they relate back to the main clause describing a noun in that main clause. So I'll give you an English example to get us going. So describing this picture, I have a cat who has one eye. The main clause in this sentence is the bit that makes sense on its own. I have a cat. The relative clause adds more information. Who has one eye? I'm describing that cat. So the noun in the main clause that links the two, that the relative clause describes, is the cat. So the cat is described as having one eye, and it's adding more information. I now want you to have a go with this next example. She did the homework which the teacher had set. So you've got 3 questions to answer. So I want you to identify the main clause and the relative clause, and I also want you to identify which noun in the main clause the relative clause describes. So pause the video now to answer the question. Okay, now rechecking your answers. The main clause, which makes sense on its own, she did the homework. The relative bit is the description, which doesn't make sense on its own, which the teacher had set. That relative clause describes homework, the noun in the main clause. Pronouns are words that stand in place of a noun so that you don't have to repeat them. And a relative pronoun is one that is used to introduce a relative clause, so they're a very useful signpost word. In English, they're WH words, who, whom, which, and so on. Whereas in Latin, they usually start with QU, so they're a nice big red flag to let you know to expect a relative clause. So now let's look at some Latin examples. I'm going to give you the translation for this first one. Ancilla, quae post salvium ambulabat, urnam portabat. That means the slave girl who was walking behind Salvius was carrying a jar. Again, I want you to pause the video and answer these questions. So identify the main clause, relative pronoun, and the noun in the main clause described by the relative clause. Pause and then start again when you're ready to check your answers. This one's a tricky one because the main clause is actually split across both ends of the sentence. Ancilla urnam portabat. The slave girl was carrying a jar. The relative clause is the bit inside the columns, quae post salvium ambulabat. So that relative pronoun quae links the two parts of the sentence together and describes the ancilla in the main clause. Next one. Prope juvenes erat plaustrum, quod totam viam claudebat. Near the young men was a wagon, which was blocking the whole street. Again, I want you to identify these different parts of the sentence and answer the questions in a note, and restart the video when you're ready to check. So the main clause is the first part of the sentence. Near the young men was a wagon. This bit makes sense on its own. The relative clause, which was blocking the whole street, quod totam viam claudebat. The relative pronoun is the word quod. Don't confuse it with because here, it means which, and it refers back to the wagon in the main part of the sentence. Hopefully now you feel a bit more confident and you understand relative pronouns and relative clauses a little bit more. If there's anything you're not sure about, note it down and we'll discuss it in class. Walete, and see you there.